You found the skeleton. How would you tell it's a dinosaur? You personally, how would you decide?
Well, interesting question. I don't know. I'd have to do some research on that.
Hey there YouTube, the Dapper Dinosaur here. Today I'm looking at a brand new anti-evolutionist. Now, this one isn't Christian, and so I'm not going to give him a label like Young Earth Creationism that implies he fits into those rather Christian categories of creationism we're all familiar with. I also have no idea how old he thinks the universe, Earth, or life are, but I can tell you he's not buying into evolution. The man of the hour is David Gottlieb. Now, he's going by Rabbi Dr. David Gottlieb. But the only person going by that I can find outside of YouTube goes by David with an O instead of an A. And it turns out, that's the same guy. His website is in fact davidgottlieb.com, no space, and with an O. But in this video, as in all the other videos on this channel, he's listed as David. Either way, this is part of a series called Jewish Philosophy, and I haven't seen any of the rest of it, nor is this a criticism of Jewish philosophy broadly. Like all religions, Judaism is a diverse thing and contains people who do and do not deny science, and who do and do not believe in God, etc. This video is about the ideas presented by David in a single video and nothing else. Anyway, here's David.
I realized the title that I wrote is not quite accurate. The many failures of the theory of evolution would take 6 or 7 hours to do thoroughly. I haven't got time to do all of them. So maybe a better title would be Some of the Many Failures of Evolution. And
I get the distinct impression that what he thinks of as the failures of evolution are actually his failures to understand evolution.
instead of just racing through about 15, what I'd rather do is try to explain one after another in a slow and thorough fashion so that it will be understood.
Well, we've got slow down.
Instead of just forming an impression, gosh, there's a lot of stuff out there, maybe you'll understand what the problems are, and that way you'll have some understanding, you can share it with others. It might be better than just racing through a whole bunch.
I actually agree. I think focusing on a small number of issues in detail is probably better than just shotgunning claims.
There are two different kinds of problems that you can raise for a proposition. Somebody says, here's my position, here are the reasons for it, I think it's correct, and I think I have adequate reason to defend it, substantiate it. There are two different ways that someone can respond critically. One way is to say, you're wrong. I know what you think, but you're wrong, and I can show it to you, I'll prove to you that you're wrong. The other way is to say, I don't know whether you're wrong or right, but your reasons aren't good reasons for your position. The truth is you don't know that you're right. And when you appreciate that your reasons aren't good reasons, then what you should do is say, gee, I thought, but now I really don't know. The critic may not know either. He just may be able to show you that your reasons aren't good reasons.
Jeez, that might be the most long-winded way to say, one way to respond critically to a claim is with counter-evidence. Okay, he's going to keep rambling a bit. We'll cut back in when he makes a new point.
Second type of critique, the guy says, I know it's true because I read it in Britannica, and I ask him, would you please take a look at the date of the Britannica you read? He looks at it, he says, oh, it's 1982. And I say, look, it's 2014. Lots of things changed in that period of time. I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but relying on the 1982 Britannica is not good evidence. It's not a good reason to accept it.
So yeah, this is another ramble that comes out to the second way to respond critically to a claim is to not offer counter-evidence, but to point out that the evidence used by the claimant is insufficient to warrant acceptance of the claim. And he's right. Those are basically the ways to respond to claims critically, although they're not exclusive.
I think there's excellent critique of the latter kind, that evolution in its present condition can't claim to have good reasons.
Yeah, we definitely don't have things like taxonomy, morphology genetics, the twin nested hierarchy, population genetics, and of course, the fossil record.
Doesn't wrong, but it means no one should say he knows it's true, and no one should present it to others if they have an obligation and responsibility to accept it as true. There's also some evidence against its truth. I wouldn't say the evidence against its truth is conclusive, but it definitely should make a person less sure, and then it contributes to the first conclusion that you haven't got good enough evidence to accept it as correct.
Well, I am greatly looking forward to this evidence. It'll be the first such I've ever encountered, and I'm sure that the good doctor has some such evidence for us. He probably won't provide things that just aren't true or don't contradict evolution because he just doesn't know enough about biology to tell the difference. And yes, this guy not being someone with a degree or evident training in the relevant fields is more likely to be ill-informed than dishonest.
Maybe it's possible, but I haven't got enough evidence to accept it. I don't know whether it's true or not. And that will be a gigantic revolution for a whole population of people who either honestly believe they know it's true or pretend to believe that because otherwise they'll lose their jobs.
Well, I definitely am in one of those categories, although which I'll leave up to your interpretation.
Okay, now the first remark in this regard, and I think this is in a way the most powerful, it's simple, it's direct, and I'll put it to you with a couple of examples, and then I'll apply it to the evolution case.
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it! Get on with it!
I invite you to a demonstration. In this demonstration, there's a thin pole with a swivel, and on top of the swivel is a revolver, a gun. And the gun can swivel 360 degrees. If you give it a twist, it will go round and round. 50 yards away is a target, a circular target, 1 foot in diameter. And I show you the following demonstration. I twist the gun, and it goes round and around, and then it shoots once and hits the target. I do that 5 times. Each time I twist it, and it goes round and around, shoots once and hits the target all 5 times.
What a perfect analogy for evolution. But okay, let's hear him out.
And I say, would you like to know how it does that? And you say, yeah, I'd like to know how it does that. How does it do that? I'll tell you how. The gun has in it a laser beam. And the target has a reflector to the laser beam. And it has a hair trigger so that when it gets a reflection back from the laser, it fires. And in that way, it's designed and it's machined to shoot just when it's going to hit the target. And that's why I hit the target 5 times in a row. Okay. I'm offering that to you as an explanation. Just offering it. That's case 1. Case 2. You ask me, how does it do that? I tell you this. I'll tell you how it does it. I just spin it. Now there's a timer on it which times it to shoot. The time is set to a random number generator, so it just makes it shoot at random. And when I spin it, it spins at random. And it hit the target 5 times in a row by accident. By accident. Those are the 2 explanations I offer you.
Yeah, the laser one seems more likely. But if we had a room with, say, 500 million force multipliers and 500 million targets, and all of them were spun at once, and all of them discharge once, then you take 5 targets which were all hit and ask me if that could be something that happened by chance. And you know what? Yeah, probably is. In fact, we could calculate the chances using things like trigonometry and the law of perspective. The real one, not the flurf one. Oh, and you know what? What the heck, let's do it. So there's a target 50 yards away. Now, those vary in size, but let's say it's 17 inches, which is the smaller size of some targets I found on Amazon. And yeah, we're using inches since apparently we're using imperial today. That means that the angular size of the target from the force multiplier is 0.54112 degrees, or 32.467 arc minutes. The rotation is 360 degrees, so we do some quick math and divide 360 by 0.54112, so the chances of hitting the target randomly in any given shot are 1 in about 665.3. That means that in my 500 million example, we should actually expect to see more than 750,000 targets hit. The law of large numbers is pretty cool, isn't it?
Now, I think your attitude ought to be, well, the first one's credible.
Yeah, seems like it. Also, this is a very dangerous experiment we're running here. Don't swing force multipliers around, people.
You don't know if it's true or not. Maybe I'm just lying. Maybe something else is going on. But if there really is a laser going out, there's a reflector, and lasers are almost instantaneous at that distance, and then there's a hair trigger to it, that's a mechanism that could do it. That's a plausible explanation. By accident, 5 times in a row, 50 yards, 1 foot in diameter.
Oh, I must have missed that it was 1 foot in diameter. That changes the chance to hit to 1 in 942.5 or so, and the number of expected hits in 500 million to 530,000.
That's not going to happen. Now, wait a minute, that's not going to happen. It could happen by accident. It could. Just you figure the chances are 1 in 10 trillion.
Actually, it's 1 in 42 octillion, a lot worse than 10 trillion.
And that's not a credible explanation. To say something happened by accident where the probability is 1 in 10 trillion is just too unlikely to accept.
Okay, now let's connect that back to evolution somehow, because evolution is very much nothing like this thought experiment, as far as I can tell.
I think if you offer the second explanation, the right response is, I can't accept that. It's just too unlikely to be true. It's got to be something else. I can't take that seriously. I hope this is ABCs. And if it's not ABCs, then suppose I spin it around 25 times in a row.
No matter how many times you do it, it's math, not spelling. But yeah, the math is pretty basic, probably high school level.
Right? Then the probability that was 1 septillion, right? Whatever it is, at a certain point, you're going to say, it's too unlikely to be true. I take that to be obvious. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2. Another case. I have an object, and on...
What the heck, man? We're just off to some other thought experiment? What did the target have to do with evolution? Was it supposed to be mutation, selection, drift, horizontal gene transfer? I guess the world may never know.
One side of the object I've painted an X. Now, I tell you I threw the object into the air, and 3 times in a row it landed on the X. And I tell you it landed on the X by accident. I didn't throw it in any special way. It is not weighted. It's not magnetized. There are no carvings in the object that catch the air currents and make it land on one side. It fell down 3 times in a row on the X by accident. Is that a plausible explanation?
Depending on the object, yes.
The answer is I've left out one crucial piece of information, which you may have sort of mentally filled in, because it's common, but I didn't say it. I didn't tell you how many sides the object has.
Hence my depending on the object.
You may have assumed it was a coin, in which case the probability is 1/8. That's not outrageous. That happens 12.5% of the time. Suppose it's a shilly gun, which has 1,000 sides. That means that the probability of throwing it into the air and getting it come down 3 times in a row on the X side is 1 in a billion. That's not reasonable.
Sure, it's possible. The chances of winning the lottery are about 1 in 300 million. Winning twice has a chance of 1 in 900 billion. And yet it's trivial to find verified reports of people who have won the lottery 2 or even more times. And the chances of rolling a particular value 3 times in a row on a 1,000-sided die are 1,000 cubed, which is to say 1 in a billion. So if things that are less likely than 1 in 900 billion happen multiple times, then one person getting a 1 in a billion chance thing to happen to them isn't surprising. If rolling such dice were as common as playing the lottery, then we should expect there to be 900 people who've rolled that 3 times in a row for each person who has won the lottery twice.
So a coin is reasonable, and a 1,000-sided piece is not reasonable.
Disagree.
Suppose I don't tell you how many sides it has. I don't tell you.
Then I can't meaningfully use the techniques of statistics to tell me how reasonable it is. But if I can get a good estimate on a range of possible sides, and I assume the worst and get a good estimate of how many times the exercise is run, then I can at least get a ballpark figure. For example, if I find it reasonable that there have been 3 billion attempts, and I figure the number of sides is probably between 800 and 1,200, then sure, having some people who've rolled that X thrice in a row is pretty likely.
What should your attitude be towards my explanation that it happened by accident? Your attitude ought to be, you haven't given me enough information to make up my mind.
Yup, that's why I had to make some reasonable assumptions to get an estimate.
If the probability is reasonably high, I'll accept it as a plausible explanation. If the probability is extremely low, I will not accept it as a plausible explanation. If you refuse to let me figure out what the probability is, then you have not given me you haven't given me enough information to rationally make up my mind whether to accept it or not. I think that's ABC. Now, the evolutionist community, and I use that word advisedly, evolutionism is another religion.
Oh, does it have a community with rituals, practices, or beliefs that bind them into such a community? Nope. Not any more than the oxygen theory of fire or the germ theory of disease do. And interestingly enough, if it were a different religion, you'd think you'd have to leave a previous religion to join it. And yet there are Jewish, Muslim, Christian, Baha'i, Sikh, Hindu, Buddhist, etc. people who accept evolution. Almost like it's not a religion at all.
The evolutionist community has been challenged repeatedly over decades. Give us a probability.
For what? Evolution happening? It's 100% because we watch it happen. We're seeing it happen right now in everything from viruses to bacteria to lizards to people.
Give us a probability. Sometimes they've been challenged by people who think they can calculate the probability and show that it's very low. I'm skeptical about that. But give us a positive probability.
Tell you what, I'll give a positive probability after rabbis give me one. Oh, for what, you ask? I don't know. I'm not telling you.
Thomas Nagel, in his book, Mind and Cosmos, which came out last year, made the same challenge as many have made. No one has even offered such a probability.
For what?
No believer in evolution has even tried to present such a probability. No one has ever taken the challenge.
It's hard for me to take a challenge when you won't tell me what the challenge is. But hey, let's meet this guy more than halfway and present an empirically backed probability for the common ancestry of all primates. According to the paper Statistical Evidence for Common Ancestry, Application to Primates by Baum et al., the chances that all primates do not share evolutionary common ancestry is 7 times 10 to the negative 1,791st power, according to at least one of their tests, and literally 0 in 12 of their tests, so basically 100%. There you go. There's a positive probability, just like Rabbi Gottlieb asked for.
To give me a probability that what you say happened by accident really happened by accident the way you say it happened.
I'm not telling you anything happened by accident. So yeah, this guy clearly doesn't know enough about evolution to critique it. He doesn't even know what the claim is, which is probably why his force multiplier and die roll examples make so little sense.
I think the very simple, clear, forced conclusion at this point is there isn't enough backing to the theory to accept it as true.
I don't know, I feel like when your probability gets to the point that no one has named numbers that big, you can be pretty confident.
You claim something happened by accident.
No, I don't.
In order to make up my mind reasonably whether to accept it or not, I have to know the probability. If you don't give me the probability, then there isn't enough backing to it to accept it as true. It might be true. I'm not saying it's false, but I certainly don't have to say, I have to agree that it's true.
Well, again, how about a probability of 7 times 10 to the negative 1,791st that it didn't happen? Seems pretty good to me. Especially when I could cite the same paper and just say 0.
Now, some people have replied to this reasoning in the following way. Let's think what you're asking for. You're asking for probability that evolution is true.
Evolution is a whole theory. It's not really true in the same sense as a singular proposition. A theory is an overarching framework in science that connects otherwise unconnected data and provides an explanatory framework to explain those data, as well as predict future data in similar subsequent observations or experiments. As such, it's not strictly a proposition, although it contains proposition. It's kind of like asking, is the Torah true? It has things in it that are true, like the names of real cities, actual civilizations, etc. It also provides the ultimate source for the halakha, which guides Jewish practice. So in some ways, yes, it's true. But then it also contains characters like Abraham and Moses, who almost certainly did not exist in any meaningful way. But does that make it false? Kind of. Similarly, evolutionary biology contains many things that are true, such as that mutations happen, that selection happens, and that allele frequencies change in populations over time. It also provides the mechanism to explain common ancestry. It also contains things that aren't really true. Like in many population genetics model, infinite population size and random mating are assumed, even though in real populations neither of these things are true. So what does that mean for the theory of evolution? Well, it remains the single theory of biodiversity, it successfully predicts data, and parts of it, like universal common ancestry and the existence of the mechanisms of evolution, are so likely true that holding the contrary, while being well informed, is basically insane. But is it true as a theory? Yes, in some ways, no in others. But the ways it's not true don't really help evolution deniers.
Well, evolution is a picture of how you start with something that makes copies of itself, and then you end up with butterflies and sequoias and platypuses and coral reefs and who knows what.
Yeah, but none of that is all by accident. There are non-chance elements to all of this, like natural and sexual selection. Evolution is contingent, but it's not accidental. Here's an example of something that is contingent, but not really accidental. This is a simulation of a reaction-diffusion interaction that I made in Blender. These reactions are really cool. They're how things like zebras, tropical fish, and giraffes get their patterning. Basically, there are two chemicals that are produced in various parts of the embryo that are antagonistic, inhibiting each other. And with the constant production and inhibition, you get cool patterns. Now, my simulation uses 4D Perlin noise. What that means is that I can change the starting conditions by sliding my initial noise texture along the fourth dimension. Then, when I perform the exact same simulation, it turns out differently. Was this an accident? Well, I don't think so, but it does have a random starting point. Now, this isn't exactly like how evolution works, but it does illustrate that processes that have random and non-random aspects can result in complex outcomes.
But golly, starting from the first thing that made copies of itself and arriving at our envelope of life, you're talking about millions or more of changes, each of which contributed to the development.
That's true.
To give you a probability of that happening, I'd have to know in some detail what each of the changes was. I'd have to know the conditions under which it took place, what's the intensity of cosmic rays in the area, and what was the temperature of the water, and the salinity of the water, and other chemicals available, and what was the composition of the atmosphere, and this changing over billions of years. I don't know all of that.
Yeah, and not only do we not know all of that, but even if we did, the probability of the exact form life has taken now in all its diversity is vanishingly small. But the system has to take a state. Let's perform a thought experiment to show how this works. The chances of any given order of cards in a 52 deck being the result of a perfect shuffle is 1 in 8.06587175 times 10 to the 67th power. That's really low. Now, let's say that you did a perfect shuffle and recorded the order of the cards, and then you did that 4 more times. Whatever you record, the chances of getting that exact sequence is 1 in 3.413830517666907 times 10 to the 339th power. So, does this mean that you can't have produced your record of cards via the mechanism of shuffling cards and then recording the order in which they were drawn? No, of course not. If you do this exercise, you have to get some sequence. The system must take some state, and pointing out how unlikely the state it took is compared to all the other states it could have taken means nothing. Any other state it could have taken is similarly unlikely. So what are the chances that evolution produced life as it exists now? Well, basically 100%. But if we reran it, what are the chances it would turn out the same way? I don't know, but it's almost zero. But the new directions in which life would evolve would be no less unlikely.
I don't know all of that. Maybe we'll never know all of that. You're asking for something that's completely impossible to deliver. Okay, I hear you. It's impossible to deliver. What am I supposed to make of that? So what? So it's impossible to deliver. Then the follow-up is, well, that's unreasonable. It's unreasonable to ask people for things that are impossible to deliver. I don't see why. I don't see why. Or rather, instead of asking you to deliver it, pointing out the consequences of not delivering it. You don't have information to give me a probability. If you don't have a probability, there isn't reason to accept it. Now you say, but it's impossible to get a probability.
No, it's not. We can get probability estimates from evolution all the time. This is science, which is all about probabilities. Now, our probability for all of evolution is probably not calculable, but we can get probabilities on things like whether a particular protein evolved from some other protein, whether a certain group of organisms share common ancestry, how many generations it will take for an organism to adapt to a new environment, etc. It's just that no one is going around aggregating all of them because that aggregate number doesn't really tell us anything useful. But of course, David here doesn't know how to investigate this. I would be surprised if he's ever read and understood a single paper published in a field relevant to evolutionary biology. And on its own, that's okay. Most people haven't. What's less okay is then pretending that that ignorance is on its own a good reason to reject science. And what's even less okay than that is thinking that you actually do have the knowledge it would take to assess the science better than the experts and take a contrary position to them. As an example, I'm not going to take a stance on the halakhic requirements surrounding driving to a synagogue on a Saturday. Some rabbis hold it is forbidden, others that it is not. And I, being not just not an expert on halakha, but not even Jewish, certainly don't have the expertise necessary to make a determination on that. And so if someone tells me that their interpretation is something or another, I cannot disagree. Even if I can tell you what I prefer if I were subject to this practice, which is that it be allowed. In the same vein, David has no business telling people what they should believe or not about science that he doesn't even understand.
So then I say, then it will always be impossible to accept it. Because you need a probability in order to reasonably be required to accept it.
You really don't, though. David here probably accepts or would accept that Saturn has 149 moons with confirmed orbits. What are the chances of that? I don't even know how to begin to answer that. Similarly, evolution is simply observed in many instances, and I don't know what the chances are that particular contingent events in the history of it occurred. But I can see it now, and there is ample evidence that it happened in the past. Not knowing the probability of something isn't on its own necessary or sufficient to believe that something has happened. This also occurs in history. What are the chances that Julius Caesar would be assassinated? I don't know, and I can't even imagine a way to calculate it. Does that mean I shouldn't believe he was assassinated? Of course not.
And if it's impossible to get one, too bad. So much the worse for you. Then throw up your hands and say, this is hopeless. There are, after all, propositions in science that are hopeless. You believe in evolution. So you believe there was a first cell.
Probably, although I could imagine more than one organism independently evolving a cell structure than having those independent evolutions persist to today. But that seems much less likely, so I do tend to believe that all cellular life evolved from a cellular ancestor. But then again, evolution is about populations, not individuals, so I'm not sure I believe in a singular first cell.
Now I ask you, was that first cell in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere?
Not a clue. Not sure why it matters either.
I think you're likely to say that's hopeless. It's just not enough information, not enough evidence available, even in principle, to determine where the first cell was.
I mean, Earth, probably? But also, here's a picture of a jar of gumballs. Is the number of gumballs even or odd? Well, you can't tell. Does that mean that there is no jar of gumballs and that asking about the jar of gumballs is stupid? Well, no, of course not. The fact that not all questions about a topic are answerable doesn't mean that the questions about it that are answerable and that we have answers for can be ignored. For example, if I know the approximate packing density for spheres, and I know the measurements of the gumballs and the volume of the container, I can tell you approximately how many gumballs are in there, even if I can't tell you that the number that is actually there and is within my margin of error is even or odd. There will always be questions about evolution and the origin of life that will never be answered. That doesn't mean that the answers we do have are false. Another example is that I don't know what my mother's mother's mother had for breakfast on her 8th birthday. That doesn't mean I don't have a great-grandmother.
Okay, then you don't know. If you don't know, don't tell me it was definitely in the southern hemisphere.
I won't, and I really don't think anyone else has either. I'm pretty sure this is just a complaint about a straw man. It's like when Kent makes up a Berkeley professor or a museum tour guide to be his foil in a story that never happened. Now, I'm not saying that this guy is anywhere close to as scummy as that felon.
Just confess you don't know.
I already did that. Not sure what else is needed.
If it's impossible to get the information, then you'll never know. Life is like that. The world is like that. There's some things we'll never know. Too bad. Maybe we'll never know whether evolution is true or not.
And there are other things that we can know, and one of them is that universal common ancestry is true and that the mechanisms of evolution can and do work on extant life, meaning they probably also operated on life in the past.
So then we'll never know it. Now, one more quip, just one more, make sure we're talking the same language. And then if you have questions about this, I'll be happy to discuss it. I think this is it's like a master argument. Now, this is not my argument. I just thought up the examples because I'm into education and communication. But
what is happening right now?
the word evolution has many different meanings.
Yes, like many words. Language is like that. But when we're talking about the theory of evolution in biology, it is rather restricted to change in allele frequencies in a population over multiple generations and the effects thereof.
Ernst Mayr, professor emeritus at Harvard, I assume he's still alive.
He died in 2005 at the age of 100. I don't know when this video was made, but given that it's about an hour long and that YouTube didn't really like that in 2005, I'm going to guess he was no longer alive when this video was made, although I suspect that this is unimportant to the point being made.
True believer in evolution and one of the field's best expositors. He also has a taste for philosophical thinking. He wrote books and essays, which I found very instructive. He has an essay on the different meanings of the word evolution, and this can cause real confusion. If I remember correctly, I remember 5 different meanings. I think other people say there are more. So it's just one of those things you got to keep in mind. Evolution sometimes means things have changed. They haven't always been the same.
Yes, we mean that when we talk about the evolution of the solar system, the evolution of dance, or the evolution of the alphabet.
Things have gotten bigger, something's gotten smaller, something's went extinct, some new species appeared. Things have not always been the same in terms of what life there is. That's the simplest. There was a 19th century German biologist, whose name escapes me at the moment, who said, and it's been quoted hundreds of times, evolution is as obvious as that the Earth goes around the sun.
I actually like that and agree, in that it's not immediately obvious just from looking around within a single human lifetime without measurement tools or without the ability to travel widely. That's why for most of the time that humans have been around, people defaulted to geocentrism and species fixity. But as we started to learn more and more about the world around us and gather observations from around the world and through time, it became more and more clear that these assumptions simply did not hold up to scrutiny. Then later, we could do things like measure the orbit of the Earth, measure the rate of evolution, confirm the orbit via stellar parallax, and common ancestry via genetics. Now, heliocentrism came earlier than evolutionary biology, but it's still a very good comparison.
What almost nobody knows, and Mayr points this out, when he said evolution is obvious, what he meant was things have changed. They haven't always been the same.
Is that what he said? I wish I could take this guy's word for it, but given that there's no citation, and given how much experience I have with anti-evolutionists misrepresenting their quotations, I simply cannot take his word for it. In fact, I think it's more likely than not that he's wrong about this.
That's a reasonable statement. The fossils, even within our time span, the fossil shows marked changes in the types of life that exist on the planet. Anybody who holds that life has never changed is someone who just saying something that's pretty obviously wrong. Maybe as obvious as the fact that the Earth goes around the sun.
I think this probably means he's not a young earther, which is good.
Then the second meaning of evolution is the changes have taken place gradually.
I actually would include that in the first definition. A rapid and sudden change isn't normally something I'd call evolution. Like if I were describing the evolution of, say, some ritual in some religion, and then one day everyone just completely altered the way they did it, like if all Christians decided that actually the Eucharist was going to be Cheetos and Mountain Dew, I would not call that part of the evolution. I would call that a break in the evolution. By the way, I have seen a Christian argue in good faith that Doritos and grape soda could be Eucharistic elements, although he stopped short of advocating for them to be used as such.
Evolution as opposed to revolution, where changes take place rapidly. That's not obvious. The fossil record does not support that. Some places it doesn't support it. Inglorious.
Wait, the fossil record doesn't support gradual change? In what universe? We have plenty of intermediate fossils showing the relatively slow progress of organisms. In fact, look, here are a bunch of them.
Great detail, like flowering plants that appear in the fossil record with no antecedents, like insects that appear in the fossil record with no antecedents.
Oh no, if only Archifrutus and Rhinoyognatha didn't exist. He might be right, except that they do. Oh well. Correct, it did not. In fact, even in The Origin of Species, Darwin thought that life went back to one or a few original forms. It turns out that universal rather than limited common ancestry is well supported. It didn't have to be that way, and it's still possible we could find life on Earth, or more likely elsewhere, that does not share common ancestry with the rest of life on Earth. But that doesn't invalidate the theory of evolution, or the common ancestry for the organisms in which it is well supported, which is currently all of them.
So that's the second meaning of evolution. That's not the one we're talking about. We're not talking about that one either. The third meaning of evolution is that all life goes back to a single common ancestor. There was a first living thing, and everything branched out from that first living thing. That didn't have to be at all.
Yep, and maybe it did, and the other 9 just didn't leave descendants.
Whatever it is that caused the existence of the first living thing might have spontaneously caused the existence of 10 living things.
Yep, but arguing that evolution could have been different doesn't really argue that it didn't happen. My mom's mom could have had another kid after her last one. That'd give me an extra aunt or uncle. She didn't, but that doesn't mean she's not my grandmother.
100 living things, and each one could have given rise to a line of descent.
Not in principle, that's just how the evidence is shaken out. It's kind of like how geography is really dedicated to the equatorial circumference of the Earth being 40,075 kilometers. It's not that it had to have been that, and that some other value would have been a disaster for the globe Earth. It's just that after checking, that's what it turned out to be. And if you want to overturn it, you'll need some damn good evidence.
But no, the theory of evolution is committed to the idea that there's a single thing.
The Origin of Species.
Then there's a certain description of how new species arise. You have groups of items, and they're bunched in classes, and the classes are isolated from one another. What was the name of Darwin's famous book?
I don't know about the key problem, but it certainly was a problem he was interested in. And hence he gathered the data and made a hypothesis about it. Turns out he was basically right, although in some details he was wrong, and there's a lot more to it than he knew about. But talking about Darwin is exhausting. Let's continue this next time. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and tell me in the comments. If you didn't, feel free to hit dislike and tell me what the problem was in the comments. Either way, please remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you're always notified when I have more content. I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. Hey, before you leave, I just want to take a second to thank my patrons and channel members, especially those pledging $20 or above. Benthoven, Tapioca Weasel, Whispers, Kelvin Brostek Van Manen, Denny5252, Eleron Teller, Phil Ravara, Ian Chen, Landon Knoll, Mabbity Babby, Monkey They Them, Mrs. Spexinder, The Venerable Bede, Sphincter of Doom, and Star Runner. It's because of my channel members and patrons whom you're seeing on screen that this channel can stay afloat. Without you, it would all shut down. If you want to join the team, there's a link to join the channel below this video, and there's a link to join the Patreon in the description. On the Patreon, you can get a 10% discount for pledging annually, and either way, you get early access to virtually all of my scripted videos, often 3 to 5 months before they come out for the general public. Thanks for watching.
How